Detective Chief Robert Hayes pulled his sedan into the driveway of his new home and took a deep breath. After 25 years of dealing with criminals, domestic disputes, and budget meetings, he was finally living his dream. The house on Maple Grove Avenue wasn't fancy, but it was his. More importantly, it came with 2 acres of private land and a long driveway that gave him the privacy he'd been craving for years. Robert had worked his way up, from beat cop to detective chief through sheer determination and countless late nights. His colleagues respected him for his fair approach and calm demeanor, even in the most stressful situations. But what they didn't know was that Robert's greatest skill wasn't solving crimes or managing a department. It was patience, and he was about to need every ounce of it. The moving truck had barely left when Robert noticed her. A woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair was standing at the end of her driveway, arms crossed, watching his every move. She wore a bright pink jogging outfit that looked like it had never seen a day of actual jogging. Her eyes followed him as he carried boxes from his car to the front door. Robert gave her a friendly wave, the kind of gesture that had helped him build trust in countless neighborhoods during his career. The woman didn't wave back. Instead, she marched across the street with the confidence of someone who owned the entire block. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of a school principal addressing a troublemaker. "I'm Beverly Thornton, president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. We need to talk." Robert set down his box and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Beverly. I'm Robert. Just moving in today." Beverly ignored his outstretched hand and instead pulled out a thick binder from seemingly nowhere. The cover read, "Maple Grove HOA Rules and Regulations" in bold red letters. She flipped it open to a page marked with at least 6 different colored sticky notes. "Before you get too comfortable," Beverly said, running her finger down a long list of rules, "there are some very important guidelines you need to understand. This is a respectable neighborhood and we intend to keep it that way." Robert nodded politely. In his years of police work, he'd learned that some people just needed to feel heard. Beverly clearly fell into that category. "Of course. I'm looking forward to being a good neighbor." "Good neighbors follow the rules," Beverly replied sharply. "Rule number 14 clearly states that all vehicles must be parked in designated areas. Your driveway extends past the approved setback line." Robert glanced at his driveway, then back at Beverly. His property deed clearly showed he had easement rights dating back to 1987, long before the HOA existed. The driveway had been there when he bought the house, but he decided not to argue on his first day. "I'll keep that in mind," he said simply. Beverly wasn't finished. She flipped to another marked page. Rule 23 addresses unusual working hours. "We've had problems with shift workers in the past. Coming and going at all hours, different vehicles, suspicious activity. It disturbs the peace of our community." Robert almost smiled. If only she knew that his unusual hours were spent keeping their community safe. As detective chief, he often worked late responding to emergencies or attending city council meetings. Sometimes he drove different vehicles when he was on call or using department cars, but to Beverly he was just another potential troublemaker. "I'll do my best to be respectful of my neighbors," Robert replied, his voice calm and measured. Beverly studied him with the intensity of a detective interrogating a suspect. Ironically, Robert had conducted hundreds of real interrogations, and Beverly's amateur attempt was almost amusing. She was clearly trying to size him up, figure out what kind of person he was. "What kind of work do you do?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already disapproved of whatever the answer might be. "I work for the city," Robert said. It wasn't a lie, just not the complete truth. He'd learned over the years that sometimes less information was better, especially when dealing with overly curious neighbors. Beverly's expression soured. "City work. That explains the irregular schedule. Well, just because you work for the government doesn't mean you're above our community standards." Robert nodded again. He could have mentioned that his government work involved running the police department that protected her neighborhood. He could have explained that his irregular schedule was because crime didn't follow a 9-to-5 routine, but something told him that Beverly wasn't really interested in understanding. She was interested in controlling. "Now about your landscaping," Beverly continued, flipping to yet another marked page. "The previous owners let things slide terribly. We expect all lawns to be maintained to community standards. Weekly mowing, proper edging, seasonal flower displays." Robert looked at his yard. It wasn't perfect, but it was neat and well maintained. The previous owners had clearly taken good care of the property. But Beverly seemed determined to find problems where none existed. "I'm planning to take good care of the property," Robert assured her. Beverly snapped the binder shut with a satisfied expression. "See that you do. I live right across the street, so I'll be keeping an eye on things. Any violations will be reported immediately to the HOA board." As Beverly marched back to her house, Robert shook his head and picked up his box. In his career, he'd dealt with drug dealers, armed robbers, and violent criminals. But somehow, Beverly Thornton might prove to be his greatest challenge yet. Over the next few days, Robert settled into his new routine. He'd wake up early, grab coffee, and head to the police station. His days were filled with briefings, investigations, and administrative duties. When he came home, usually after dark, he'd park in his driveway and try to unwind from another day of keeping the city safe. But every day he noticed Beverly watching from her window. She'd make notes in a small notebook whenever he arrived or left. Once he caught her taking pictures of his car with her phone. When she saw him looking, she quickly disappeared behind her curtains. Robert had seen this behavior before in his police work. Some people became obsessed with perceived problems, creating elaborate theories about perfectly innocent activities. Beverly was clearly one of those people. But unlike the cases he dealt with at work, this time he was the target of her suspicious nature. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, the person responsible for investigating real suspicious activity in their city, being treated like a criminal by his own neighbor. But Robert had learned long ago that patience and professionalism could solve most problems. He just hoped Beverly would eventually calm down and realize he wasn't a threat to her precious neighborhood. Little did Robert know that Beverly's suspicions were only going to get worse. And soon, her amateur detective work would lead to a confrontation that neither of them would forget. The first note appeared on Robert's windshield 3 days after moving in. It was written on official-looking HOA letterhead in Beverly's precise handwriting. "Parking violation. Vehicle positioned beyond approved setback line. First warning. Future violations will result in fines." Robert read the note twice, then looked at his driveway. His car was parked exactly where cars had been parked for decades, well within his property lines. He pulled out his property deed from the glove compartment and double-checked the boundaries. Everything was perfectly legal. His easement rights were clearly documented. But Robert had dealt with enough neighborhood disputes during his police career to know that facts didn't always matter to people like Beverly. Some folks got an idea stuck in their head, and no amount of evidence could shake it loose. The next morning, Robert tried a diplomatic approach. He walked across the street and knocked on Beverly's door. She answered wearing the same pink jogging outfit, looking like she'd been expecting him. "I got your note," Robert said politely. "I think there might be some confusion about my property boundaries." Beverly's expression hardened. "There's no confusion. I've been living here for 12 years. I know exactly where every property line is." Robert pulled out his deed and unfolded it carefully. "According to this, my driveway easement extends to the main road. It's been this way since 1987. Beverly glanced at the document for exactly 2 seconds before dismissing it with a wave of her hand. "Anyone can fake paperwork these days. The HOA has final authority over all common areas, and your little road crosses our common space. Ma'am, this isn't fake. It's the official property deed from the county recorder's office. You can verify it yourself." "Don't you ma'am me," Beverly snapped. "And don't try to intimidate me with your government connections. I've dealt with plenty of city workers who think they're above the rules." Robert felt his patience being tested, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone. I just want us to be good neighbors." Beverly crossed her arms. "Good neighbors follow HOA rules." End of discussion. As Robert walked back to his house, he noticed several other neighbors watching from their windows. Great. Beverly was already turning this into neighborhood drama. Robert had seen this pattern before. One difficult person could poison an entire community if left unchecked. The notes kept coming. Every few days, there was something new tucked under his windshield wiper. Excessive noise complaint, vehicle doors slamming, after 10 p.m. Suspicious? Activity report, multiple different vehicles. Observed. Landscaping violation, grass height, exceeds community standards. Each complaint was more ridiculous than the last. Robert's grass was perfectly maintained. His excessive noise was simply the sound of a car door closing when he came home from work. And the multiple different vehicles were department cars he occasionally drove home when on call. What bothered Robert most wasn't Beverly's petty harassment. It was the way she seemed to be watching his every move. From his bedroom window, he could see her house across the street. Beverly spent hours each day positioned at her front window, notebook in hand, documenting his activities. As police chief, Robert knew stalking behavior when he saw it. Beverly's obsessive monitoring crossed the line from nosy neighbor to something more concerning. But he also knew that confronting her directly might escalate the situation. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Robert had spent 14 hours dealing with a major drug bust that made the evening news. He was exhausted, hungry, and looking forward to a quiet night at home. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw Beverly marching toward his car with her usual determined stride. "We need to talk," Beverly announced before Robert could even get out of his car. Robert took a deep breath and stepped out. "What's the problem now, Beverly?" She held up her phone, displaying what looked like a blurry photo. "I have evidence of your illegal activities. You've been conducting business from your residence, which violates our residential-only zoning restrictions." Robert looked at the photo. It showed him talking to Officer Johnson earlier that week. Johnson had stopped by to drop off some files that Robert needed to review at home. The conversation had lasted maybe 5 minutes. "That's not business activity," Robert explained. "That was just a colleague dropping something off." "A colleague?" Beverly's voice rose an octave. "What kind of colleague visits at 9 p.m.? What kind of legitimate business requires secretive nighttime meetings?" Robert almost laughed. The secretive meeting had taken place in broad daylight on his front porch. But Beverly had apparently convinced herself she was witnessing some kind of criminal conspiracy. "Beverly, I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "Don't treat me like I'm stupid," she shot back. "I've been documenting your pattern of behavior for weeks. Irregular hours, different vehicles, mysterious visitors. It's obvious you're running some kind of illegal operation." Robert felt his professional instincts kicking in. Beverly wasn't just being difficult anymore. She was creating elaborate conspiracy theories based on completely innocent activities. This kind of paranoid thinking sometimes escalated into more serious problems. "What exactly do you think I'm doing?" Robert asked calmly. Beverly leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing classified information. "Drug dealing. It's the only explanation that makes sense. The late hours, the different cars, the secretive meetings. You probably chose this house because of the private driveway. Perfect for customers who don't want to be seen." Robert stared at her in amazement. Beverly had spent weeks watching him come and go from his job as police chief, and she'd concluded he was a drug dealer. The irony was almost too much to handle. "Beverly, I can assure you that I'm not involved in anything illegal." "That's exactly what a drug dealer would say," she replied triumphantly. "Well, I've got news for you, mister. I'm not going to let you turn our peaceful neighborhood into some kind of criminal hub. I'm prepared to take action." "What kind of action?" Beverly pulled herself up to her full height, which wasn't particularly impressive, and spoke with the authority of someone who'd watched too many crime shows on TV. "I'm going to expose you. I have documentation, photographs, witness statements from other concerned neighbors." Robert doubted the other neighbors were as concerned as Beverly claimed. Most people minded their own business and didn't spend their days spying on new residents. But Beverly clearly believed she was some kind of neighborhood detective. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Robert tried one more time. "The only misunderstanding is on your part," Beverly declared. "You thought you could move into our quiet community and corrupt it with your illegal activities. Well, you picked the wrong neighborhood, and you definitely picked the wrong person to mess with." As Beverly stormed back to her house, Robert shook his head in disbelief. In 25 years of police work, he'd encountered all kinds of people. But Beverly's combination of nosiness, paranoia, and absolute certainty about being right was something special. Robert knew he could easily resolve the situation by simply telling Beverly who he was. But part of him was curious to see how far her amateur investigation would go. Besides, as a police officer, he'd learned valuable lessons about community dynamics from dealing with neighborhood disputes. This situation was like a real-life case study in how quickly misunderstandings could spiral out of control. What Robert didn't realize was that Beverly's investigation was about to take a dramatic turn. Her certainty about his criminal activities was growing stronger every day, and soon she would decide that documentation and photographs weren't enough. It was time to call in the professionals. Friday night started like any other for Robert. He'd been planning to leave the office by 6 and finally have a quiet evening at home. Maybe order some pizza, watch a movie, and forget about criminals and paperwork for a few hours. But then the call came in about a 3-car accident on Highway 15, and his plans went out the window. As police chief, Robert didn't have to respond to every accident. But this one involved a potential fatality and a drunk driver, which meant media attention and possible lawsuits. He needed to be there to make sure everything was handled properly. By the time Robert finally headed home, it was nearly 11 p.m. He was driving an unmarked apartment sedan because his personal car was in the shop, and he needed to stay on call in case the accident investigation required his input. The unmarked car looked like any other black sedan, but it was equipped with radio equipment and emergency lights. Robert was exhausted as he turned onto Maple Grove Avenue. All he wanted was to get inside, grab a late dinner, and try to unwind from another stressful day. He pulled into his driveway without really thinking about it, the same way he'd done dozens of times since moving in. Across the street, Beverly Thornton was having trouble sleeping. She'd spent the evening researching drug-dealing operations online, convinced she was building an airtight case against her suspicious neighbor. According to the articles she'd read, drug dealers often used multiple vehicles and conducted business at unusual hours to avoid detection. When Beverly heard a car engine in the quiet neighborhood, she immediately went to her bedroom window. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. A dark sedan with tinted windows was pulling into Robert's driveway. The driver was a man she didn't recognize, wearing dark clothing and moving with what she interpreted as suspicious stealth. Beverly grabbed her notebook and started writing. 11:03 p.m. Unknown subject in unmarked vehicle accessing property via illegal driveway. Subject appears to be conducting surveillance of neighborhood. Robert, completely unaware he was being watched, locked his car and walked to his front door. He was still wearing the same clothes he'd put on 14 hours earlier, wrinkled from a long day of meetings and accident scenes. All he was thinking about was getting inside and finally relaxing, but Beverly's imagination was running wild. The man's furtive movements, the late hour, the unmarked vehicle, everything fit her theory perfectly. This wasn't just a drug deal. This was something bigger. Maybe Robert was running some kind of criminal organization, and this was one of his associates coming to plan their next illegal activity. Beverly watched as the mystery man disappeared into Robert's house. The lights came on in the living room, then the kitchen. She could see shadows moving around inside, but she couldn't make out any details through the curtains. For 20 minutes, Beverly maintained her surveillance post, documenting every detail she could observe. The vehicle remained in the driveway. Lights stayed on in various rooms. Occasionally she could see movement, which she interpreted as multiple people having some kind of meeting. In reality, Robert was heating up leftover Chinese food and checking his emails about the accident investigation. But Beverly's mind was creating an elaborate criminal conspiracy from the simple act of a tired man trying to eat dinner. Finally, Beverly decided she'd seen enough evidence. Her research had told her that citizens should report suspected drug activity immediately, before criminals could destroy evidence or flee the scene. She picked up her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered. I need to report suspicious criminal activity in my neighborhood, Beverly said, her voice trembling with excitement and nervous energy. What type of criminal activity, ma'am? Beverly took a deep breath. This was her moment. There's a man who's been conducting illegal operations from a house on my street. Tonight I witnessed what appears to be a drug deal or criminal meeting. He's been operating for weeks using multiple vehicles and meeting with associates at all hours. The dispatcher, Lisa Chen, had been working emergency services for 8 years. She'd handled thousands of calls, and she could usually tell within the first few sentences whether she was dealing with a real emergency or an overactive imagination. Can you give me the address where this is occurring? Lisa asked. Beverly provided Robert's address on Maple Grove Avenue. Lisa typed it into her computer and immediately recognized it. That was Chief Hayes' new address. The chief had updated his contact information just last week when he moved. Ma'am, can you describe the suspicious individual? Lisa asked, already suspecting what was happening. Male, approximately 6 feet tall, dark hair, wearing dark clothing. He arrived in an unmarked sedan with tinted windows. He's clearly conducting some kind of illegal business from that residence. Lisa looked at the notes on her screen. The description matched Chief Hayes perfectly, and an unmarked sedan was standard equipment for police executives. But she couldn't tell Beverly that without potentially compromising an investigation or violating privacy policies. "Has this person threatened you or anyone else directly?" Lisa asked. "Not directly, but his presence is clearly a threat to our peaceful community. I've been documenting his suspicious behavior for weeks. Different vehicles at all hours, secretive meetings, obvious drug dealing activities." Beverly's voice was getting more agitated as she spoke. Lisa could hear the conviction in her tone. Beverly genuinely believed she was reporting serious criminal activity. "Ma'am, I'm going to send officers to investigate. Can you stay on the line and provide more details about what you're currently observing?" "Yes, absolutely," Beverly replied, feeling vindicated. Finally, someone was taking her seriously. "The suspect is still inside the residence. His vehicle is parked in the driveway. I can see lights on in multiple rooms, suggesting there may be several people involved in whatever illegal activity they're conducting." Lisa dispatched officers Rodriguez and Thompson to the scene while keeping Beverly on the line. Both officers had worked under Chief Hayes for several years and would immediately recognize the situation. "Officers are en route," Lisa told Beverly. "Please stay inside your home for your safety and continue to observe from your window." Beverly felt a surge of triumph. After weeks of being dismissed and ignored, her investigation was finally being taken seriously by law enforcement. She was about to expose the criminal operation that had been threatening her neighborhood. "The officers should be there within 5 minutes, Lisa said. "Is there anything else you can tell me about the suspect's activities?" Beverly launched into a detailed account of everything she'd observed over the past few weeks. Her evidence included Robert's irregular schedule, the different vehicles he drove, his mysterious meetings with associates, and what she interpreted as obvious attempts to avoid detection. As Beverly spoke, Lisa couldn't help but smile slightly. Chief Hayes was about to have an interesting evening. She made sure to note in the dispatch log that this appeared to be a misunderstanding involving the chief's residence, so the responding officers would understand the situation immediately. "Ma'am, officers are pulling up to the scene now," Lisa said as she saw the patrol cars arrive on her dispatch screen. Beverly moved to her front window, notebook in hand, ready to provide a full briefing to the officers about the criminal operation she'd uncovered. She had no idea that she was about to experience the most embarrassing moment of her life. The blue and red lights of 2 patrol cars lit up Maple Grove Avenue like a Christmas display. Officers Rodriguez and Thompson pulled up to Robert's address and immediately noticed the unmarked department sedan in the driveway. Both officers had worked under Chief Hayes long enough to recognize his vehicle. Rodriguez radioed dispatch. "Unit 23 on scene. We have visual confirmation of Chief Hayes' vehicle. Requesting verification on the nature of this call." Dispatcher Lisa Chen's voice crackled through the radio. "Unit 23, be advised this appears to be a civilian complaint involving the chief's residence. Reporting party believes suspicious activity is occurring. Chief Hayes is likely unaware of the situation." Thompson shook his head and grinned. "This should be interesting." Meanwhile, Beverly Thornton burst out of her front door like a woman on a mission. She clutched her notebook and phone, practically vibrating with excitement as she hurried across the street toward the officers. This was her moment of vindication. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Beverly called out, waving her arms to get their attention. "I'm the one who called. I'm Beverly Thornton, president of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association." Officer Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran who had seen every type of neighborhood dispute imaginable, walked over to meet Beverly. "Ma'am, we received your call about suspicious activity. Can you tell us exactly what you observed?" Beverly opened her notebook with the flourish of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "I've been conducting surveillance of this property for 3 weeks. The suspect has been operating what appears to be a drug-dealing operation or some other illegal business." Thompson bit his lip to keep from laughing. "Chief Hayes, a drug dealer. That was rich. What makes you think illegal activity is occurring?" Rodriguez asked, maintaining his professional demeanor. Beverly flipped through pages of detailed notes. Multiple vehicles at unusual hours, secretive meetings with known associates, obvious attempts to avoid detection. Tonight I witnessed what appeared to be a high-level criminal meeting. As Beverly continued her detailed briefing, Robert appeared at his front door. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, holding a cup of coffee, looking like any other tired homeowner wondering why police cars were parked outside his house. "Evening, Chief," Rodriguez called out respectfully. Beverly's confident expression faltered slightly. Did that officer just call the suspect chief? That was odd. Maybe it was some kind of street name or gang reference. Robert walked over to the officers, still processing the surreal scene playing out in his driveway. What's going on, guys? We received a call about suspicious activity at this address, Thompson explained, gesturing toward Beverly. The reporting party has some concerns about your activities. Robert looked at Beverly, who was staring at the interaction between Robert and the officers with growing confusion. Something wasn't adding up in her carefully constructed theory. Ma'am, Rodriguez said to Beverly, I'd like you to meet Chief Robert Hayes. He's the police chief for our department. The words hit Beverly like a physical blow.
Police chief.
The mysterious drug dealer she'd been investigating for weeks was the police chief. The blood drained from her face as the full implications of her mistake became clear. That's impossible, Beverly stammered. He told me he worked for the city. He never said he was police chief. Robert stepped forward, his expression calm but serious. Ma'am, I did tell you I worked for the city. The police department is part of city government. Beverly's mind raced as she tried to reconcile her elaborate conspiracy theories with this new reality. But the irregular hours, the different vehicles, the secretive meetings. I work irregular hours because crime doesn't follow a 9-to-5 schedule, Robert explained patiently. I drive different vehicles because sometimes I use department cars when I'm on call. And those secretive meetings were officers dropping off paperwork or briefing me on cases. Thompson couldn't resist adding, Chief Hayes has been our department head for 6 months. He's one of the most respected law enforcement officials in the state. Beverly felt the earth shifting beneath her feet. Every piece of evidence she'd collected suddenly had a perfectly innocent explanation. The late-night arrivals were a police chief coming home from work. The different vehicles were department cars. The mysterious visitors were police officers. I didn't know, Beverly whispered, her voice barely audible. Other neighbors had started emerging from their houses, drawn by the flashing lights and commotion. Beverly could feel their eyes on her as the humiliating truth spread through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down approached cautiously. What's happening? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Robert assured her. Just a misunderstanding. But Beverly knew it was much more than a misunderstanding. She'd spent weeks convinced she was uncovering a criminal conspiracy, when in reality she'd been spying on the very person responsible for keeping their community safe. Officer Rodriguez maintained his professional tone as he addressed Beverly. Ma'am, we appreciate citizens who are concerned about neighborhood safety. However, making false reports to 911 can have serious consequences. I wasn't making a false report, Beverly protested weakly. I genuinely thought. How was I supposed to know? Robert could see that Beverly was genuinely embarrassed and shaken. Despite weeks of harassment and accusations, he felt a wave of sympathy for her. She'd made an honest mistake, even if it was based on assumptions and poor judgment. Officers, I think we can resolve this without any formal action, Robert said diplomatically. Mrs. Thornton was trying to be a good neighbor, even if her methods were a bit misguided. Beverly looked at Robert with a mixture of gratitude and shame. She'd spent weeks treating him like a criminal, and now he was protecting her from the consequences of her mistake. Rodriguez nodded. Understood, Chief. We'll file this as a resolved misunderstanding. As the officers prepared to leave, Thompson couldn't resist one final comment. Mrs. Thornton, you might want to consider talking to your neighbors before calling 911 next time. Could save everyone a lot of trouble. Beverly nodded mutely, clutching her notebook full of useless surveillance notes. The elaborate investigation she'd been so proud of now seemed ridiculous and embarrassing. Chief, sorry to disturb your evening, Rodriguez said as he and Thompson headed back to their patrol cars. No problem. Thanks for the quick response. As the police cars pulled away, the flashing lights faded, and the street returned to its normal quiet state. But Beverly's world had been completely turned upside down. The man she'd been convinced was a dangerous criminal was actually the person responsible for protecting her from dangerous criminals. The neighbors who had gathered gradually returned to their homes, but Beverly could see them talking in small groups, probably discussing her spectacular mistake. She'd gone from neighborhood watch coordinator to neighborhood laughingstock in the span of 10 minutes. Robert stood in his driveway, looking at Beverly with an expression she couldn't quite read. She expected anger, or at least satisfaction at her humiliation. Instead, he looked almost sympathetic. "Beverly," Robert said quietly, "would you like to come inside for a few minutes? I think we should talk." Beverly stood frozen in Robert's driveway, clutching her notebook like a security blanket. Her face was still flushed with embarrassment, and she couldn't bring herself to make eye contact with the man she'd spent weeks investigating as a criminal. "I should probably go home," Beverly said quietly. Her usual commanding presence completely deflated. "Beverly, please," Robert said gently. "I think it would be good for both of us to talk about what just happened. You don't have to, but I'd appreciate the chance to clear the air." Something in his tone made Beverly look up. She expected to see anger or mockery, but Robert's expression was kind, almost understanding. After the way she'd treated him, his patience was the last thing she'd expected. "I feel like such a fool," Beverly admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not a fool," Robert replied. "You saw something you didn't understand and you tried to protect your neighborhood. That's actually admirable, even if the methods weren't perfect." Beverly followed Robert into his house, still feeling surreal about the entire situation. She'd imagined this house as some kind of criminal headquarters. Instead, it looked like any other comfortable family home. There were unpacked boxes in the corners, family photos on the mantel, and the smell of reheated Chinese food in the air. Robert gestured to his living room couch. "Can I get you some coffee or water?" "Water would be nice," Beverly said, settling onto the couch and looking around nervously. As Robert went to the kitchen, Beverly noticed a wall covered with commendations and awards. Photos of Robert in police uniform, shaking hands with mayors and city officials. A framed newspaper article about his promotion to police chief. Evidence of the career she'd completely misunderstood. Robert returned with 2 glasses of water and sat in the chair across from Beverly. "I owe you an apology," he said. Beverly nearly choked on her water. "You owe me an apology? I'm the one who called the police on you. I'm the one who spent weeks convinced you were a drug dealer. You asked me what kind of work I did, and I gave you a vague answer. I said I worked for the city, which was technically true, but I could have been more specific. If I'd just told you I was police chief from the beginning, none of this would have happened." Beverly shook her head. "You shouldn't have had to explain your entire career to a nosy neighbor. I made assumptions based on nothing but my own paranoia." Robert leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. "Can I ask you something? What made you so convinced I was involved in illegal activity?" Beverly looked down at her notebook, now seeing weeks of surveillance notes in a completely different light. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. It's always been quiet, predictable. When you moved in with your irregular schedule and different cars, it just felt suspicious." "And the secretive meetings?" Beverly's face reddened again. "Officer Johnson came by last Tuesday to drop off some files. I saw you two talking on the porch, but I couldn't hear what you were saying. In my mind, it became the secret criminal meeting." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Johnson was bringing me case files to review at home. We were probably talking about whether the district attorney would pursue charges in an assault case." "I feel so stupid," Beverly said, covering her face with her hands. "Beverly, look at me," Robert said firmly but kindly. "You made a mistake, but your heart was in the right place. You care about your neighborhood. That's not something to be ashamed of." Beverly lowered her hands. "But I harassed you for weeks. I left nasty notes on your car. I accused you of being a criminal. How can you be so understanding about it?" Robert was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "In my job, I see a lot of people at their worst moments. People who've made bad decisions, people who've let fear or anger control their actions. But I've learned that most people aren't really bad. They're just scared or confused or trying to protect something they care about." "Is that your professional opinion of me? Scared and confused?" Robert smiled slightly. "I think you're someone who cares deeply about your community. Maybe sometimes that caring makes you a little too protective, but that's better than not caring at all." Beverly felt tears welling up in her eyes. She'd expected anger, maybe even legal consequences for her false report. Instead, this man she'd wronged was showing her more kindness than she'd shown him. "What happens now?" Beverly asked. "The whole neighborhood saw what happened tonight. Everyone knows I called the police on the police chief. The neighborhood will talk for a few days and then something else will capture their attention," Robert said pragmatically. "But more importantly, you and I can start over. We're still neighbors." Beverly looked around Robert's living room again, seeing it with completely new eyes. All those weeks I was so sure you were the threat to our neighborhood. I never even considered that you might be the person protecting it. Well, technically, I protect the whole city, Robert said with a slight grin. But your neighborhood is definitely included. Beverly managed a small laugh, the first genuine emotion she'd felt since the police cars arrived. I suppose I should thank you for not pressing charges against me for filing a false report. You didn't file a false report, Robert corrected her. You reported what you genuinely believed to be suspicious activity. The fact that you were wrong doesn't make it false. It makes it a misunderstanding. A very public, very embarrassing misunderstanding. Everyone makes mistakes, Beverly. What matters is what we do after we make them. Beverly stood up, feeling emotionally drained but somehow lighter than she had in weeks. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my reputation in this neighborhood. Your reputation will recover, Robert assured her. But maybe next time you're concerned about something, you could try talking to the person directly before calling in the cavalry. Beverly laughed despite herself. That's probably good advice for someone who just called the police on the police chief. As Robert walked Beverly to the door, she turned back one more time. Robert, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you become a police officer? Robert thought for a moment. Because I wanted to help people. Sometimes that means catching bad guys, but sometimes it means helping good people who are having a bad day. Beverly nodded, understanding the subtle message in his words. Thank you for helping me have a better ending to what was definitely a bad day. Anytime, neighbor. Over the next few weeks, the story of Beverly's mistake became neighborhood legend. But instead of becoming a source of ongoing embarrassment, it became something different. Beverly found herself laughing about it with other neighbors, who appreciated her ability to admit her error and learn from it. More importantly, Beverly channeled her natural vigilance into more productive community activities. She started a legitimate neighborhood watch program, working with Robert to understand what actually constituted suspicious activity. She organized community meetings where residents could meet their local police officers and understand how law enforcement worked. Robert, for his part, made an effort to be more visible in the neighborhood. He attended HOA meetings, participated in community events, and helped Beverly turn her embarrassing mistake into a positive force for community engagement. Months later, when new neighbors moved onto Maple Grove Avenue, Beverly would tell them the story of how she once called the police on the police chief. But she told it as a cautionary tale about the importance of communication, understanding, and giving people the benefit of the doubt. And Robert, whenever he told the story to his fellow officers, would always end it the same way. Sometimes the best thing you can do as a cop is help someone save face after they've made an honest mistake. It builds more community trust than a dozen arrests. The private road dispute that started it all was quietly resolved when the HOA board reviewed the property deeds and confirmed Robert's easement rights. Beverly, in her new role as Reformed Neighborhood Watch Coordinator, made sure all the documentation was properly filed and understood by future residents. In the end, what started as a conflict between neighbors became a story about the power of patience, understanding, and second chances, and Beverly never again called 911 without first talking to her neighbors about her concerns.